So let's go ahead and move on. What I'm excited about right now is we're going to get an update from Hastings-on-Hudson, located in Westchester County. We're going to have Ian Simonides, who's one of the Climate Smart Communities Task Force co-chairs, is just going to kind of run us through what's happened since that Hastings resolution. And then we're going to have a discussion with him, Mayor Armacost, and Morgan Fleissig who's one of the trustees for Hastings, about what's next. Ian, are you able to share your screen?
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Matt, for that excellent presentation. So I just want to give an update from our last webinar and what Hastings has done since we passed the resolution. Here we are in Hastings in Lower Hudson Valley. That little red square is Hastings. We are a Silver Certified Climate Smart community. So the resolution, which was passed on the 18th of May by the Village Board of Trustees, was really inspired by some other resolutions that happened. One was in Honolulu, Hawaii, one was in Austin, Texas, and another was passed by the U.S. Congress of Mayors. And those three resolutions focused on the carbon mineralized concrete that both Chris and Matt mentioned. The Hastings resolution is a bit broader and focuses on low embodied carbon concrete products, which, as we saw from Matt's presentation, is a multitude of things. And we wanted to keep it broad for that purpose, to allow the village to follow any number of different pathways to lowering the embodied carbon of concrete. But the other thing that's great about it is that it's easily replicable. Any community in the country, in the state of New York, in the rest of the country could, or in another country, could take this resolution as a base and adapt it to their needs. So that's one of the really, really great aspects of it. So since we passed the resolution, which specifically promotes low embodied carbon concrete for building and infrastructure projects, we replaced a retaining wall. There was an old stone wall that was maybe about 100 years old that was unfortunately taken out by a runaway asphalt truck, ironically, whose brakes failed. But after the resolution, Mayor Armacost identified this Cliff Street retaining wall as sort of the premier opportunity for us to use low carbon concrete in the village. And so you can see here, the picture on the left is the wall right after the concrete was poured in the casting. And then the picture to the right is the finished product with the stone finishing. And so that happened in early October, that was poured. So that's sort of the first project where we've really used low carbon concrete. Upcoming, and the date for this project, the actual pouring, is to be determined because of COVID, and now with the weather getting colder, it seems it might be delayed a little bit into the new year. But this is a curbing contract that the village has, and it's been approved. The low carbon concrete mix has been approved. And it's a very similar mix to the one we used in the retaining wall. And so that's upcoming. And then the other project was the incorporating low carbon concrete into the village's green building code. Hastings has had a green building code since about 2013. And this was another opportunity that Mayor Armacost identified for us to actually try and influence the private sector to use low carbon concrete. That update of the Green Building Code is currently out for review. So fingers crossed that it gets approved. But those are sort of the three main projects that have stemmed pretty quickly from the passage of this resolution in May. And now I just want to go a little bit more into sort of how the project was implemented. And this is really speaking about my experience from the Cliff Street retaining wall project. So I got involved through the Climate Smart Communities, but that's, they're just in the state of New York. You could be any sort of climate advocate in your local community and get involved in this. And the first connection was to the local government. Usually if you're a Climate Smart community, you're doing climate advocacy, you're in contact with people in your local government. And hopefully, if they're not on board, you can get them on board, or they're already there and they're already thinking about these climate actions. And you can bring this idea to them. And then hopefully what they can do is they can connect you to the local engineer, the village engineer, or the town engineer, who is really the person who engineers the public works projects in that community. And connecting with that person is really key. And having a local government officials sort of facilitate that connection is really key, because these engineers really hold the key to approving using a low carbon concrete mix in these projects. And if you get them on board, they're one of your greatest allies. And then what they can do, and this is how it worked for me, was that they can then connect you to the project contractor. And that's important because you want, this contractor is the person who's going to be working with the concrete, and you want them on board too, because you don't want them all of a sudden to be surprised when some product that they've never heard of shows up on site. You want them to know what they're going to be using and to be on board with it as well. And also importantly, they can connect you to the local concrete provider. And as Matt mentioned, this is where you can really get the low carbon concrete. It's through the concrete provider. They're the ones who have the SCMs, the supplementary cementitious materials, and they're the ones who can really tell you how you can lower the embodied carbon of your concrete and reach a lower carbon footprint of the concrete you use. So with the concrete provider I was in touch with, I talked to them about their low carbon concrete options, what they had available. And they told me that they had slag and that they could offer we were looking for a Class HP cement mix, and they could give us a Class HP 20% slag mix that met all of the necessary strength requirements. And using that mix, we got approximately 15% reduction in the global warming potential of the concrete that we used in the Cliff Street project. So I hope that this sort of diagram and this explanation gives people in there a sense of how they can accomplish these projects in these local communities. And hopefully you have sort of a small project like this. The Cliff Street project wasn't big, but what it allows is to get a sense of the players. You know, on this screen, you're seeing, these are the stakeholders. These are the people that need to be involved in implementing these kinds of projects. And a small project like this can really show you the path of implementing greater projects in your local community using low carbon concrete. So that's my little update.
That's great. It's a big update. Really excellent to see how that unfolds. And what I'd like to do is invite Morgan and Mayor Armacost to also join, just have a quick discussion before we cap off. And so, Morgan or Ian just sort of indicated, but I'm wondering, Mayor Armacost, if you could just sort of talk a little bit about, from your view, how a resolution, which many people think is sort of a symbolic gesture, can actually have very material sort of impact. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the resolution did set everything in motion here.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Ian, for your great description of the process. The resolution was really important because what it does is it grounds the project. So it kind of sets out the framework that we, in our case, we wanted to move forward, the kind of overall goals we wanted to achieve, our description of what low carbon concrete meant, and specific kind of ideas about how we can move it forward. So for us, that retaining wall project was really a pilot project to see whether we were going to be able to make this idea, which sounded fantastic on paper and in the form of a resolution, into something real. And it was an interesting project because it was already in progress when we passed the resolution. So we asked our village manager and engineer to see whether we could ask the contractor to make this switch from whatever concrete he was planning to use a low carbon alternative. As Ian said, the key thing was getting our engineer on board, and for me the key thing was to get our village manager on board. Both of them got it. Both of them saw that this would be a way to make that resolution real. And our engineer, Doug Hahn, explained what we meant by low carbon, a low carbon alternative to the contractor. It took a little bit of time, but he got it. He came up with a mix that met our criterion. And the key thing was there was no cost difference. So it was uncontroversial. So we were able to do this pilot project low cost and kind of move it forward. And, you know, as Ian said, now what we're planning to do is look at curbing projects, and not just curbing, sidewalks. There's a huge amount of sort of sidewalk planning we have in place, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But, you know, to get back to your question, the resolution grounded everything. The resolution laid out what our goals were. The resolution explained what we meant by low carbon concrete, and it kind of gave a framework for projects which were not just municipal projects, but kind of went beyond it. So hopefully I've answered what you were asking, Chris.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I think a lot of the questions that I wanted to answer were pretty comprehensively just answered in your response, as well as Ian's. But one part that I kind of want to, we'll talk about sidewalks in a second, which is obviously something that we're very excited about in Hastings and beyond. But one thing I just want to kind of, I guess, sort of sum up a little bit is that, you know, I've been so impressed with your team there in Hastings, Mayor Armacost, and Ian and Morgan have done a lot of legwork here. But I think what it shows is, again, that kind of catalytic role that volunteers or staff can have to really bring people together, raise a level of education, and then start to kind of move things forward. And I think that that's incredibly instructive for other folks who have those roles in other communities throughout New York State, New Jersey, and everywhere else beyond. So I just want to really emphasize it's been an impressive thing to see. Now let's actually go ahead and talk about what's next. I mean, you've got this learning curve here. I know there's a few projects you're looking at, but I know there's a sidewalk project that maybe you could tell us a little bit about where Hastings is with that, and I can link it to what I think might be more universally interesting to attendees.
Well, I actually think it would be great if Morgan talked about that. Morgan is, we on our board of trustees, different trustees have different roles and kind of projects that they help to shepherd through. And Morgan has really been the one who has been pushing this notion of expanding and improving the sidewalks in the village. So Morgan, maybe you can talk a little bit more detail about the sidewalk project.
Certainly, Mayor. And I'm certainly not championing the sidewalks by myself. I mean, we were a very organized and concerned board of trustees. I guess I take one step back. I mean, first off, these presentations have all been amazing, and I think you guys have covered just about every detail. I think I'm an architect. For issue which Professor Adams touched on, which affects us, is our specifications. So almost everything we rely on the New York State Department of Transportation for our specifications, and the HP type for the concrete at Cliff Street is actually very applicable to sidewalks, but frankly, it's complete overkill also. And so the issue then becomes, well, fine, what is a strength level that you can look at for sidewalks? And it opens up a whole sort of can of worms. I mean, we have, you know, when you're putting in sidewalks in a village and curbs, you still have to be mindful of the fact that, you know, they're part of a network of streets, and, you know, they are, even if they're not necessarily being installed by the New York State Department of Transportation, they still may need to comply with the regulations. So you have to sort of look at that whole picture. But the fact is, the DOT already has within their specifications low-hanging fruit for reducing the embodied carbon footprint. And frankly, that was, you know, to Ian's credit, that really was what he went after in identifying that HP type. And the substitute is actually listed in the DOT's specifications, but it's really buried in there. And I would encourage everyone attending this call to this meeting to actually look at their specifications very carefully that the state puts together, and really try and understand where the, you know, the so-called low-hanging fruit is for reducing the embodied carbon.
Yeah. So just I want to kind of propose to the attendees a possible collaboration around sidewalks. But first, before that, Mayor Armacost, anything else you wanted to add to that, just to sort of cap off the sidewalk project?
Yeah, just to say that, this year by coincidence, we're going to be spending between 250 and 500,000 on sidewalks. So, thinking about that and sort of thinking about the point that Ian made about both, he made the point about replication, but also the point about leverage. So if you leverage that 500,000, if you think about all of the municipalities that are near us, if we were in consortia together, how much impact that would make, both in terms of funding leveraged toward this, in terms of CO2 reduction, and thinking about replication of the policy initiative. It would be great to have our sister municipalities pass similar resolutions, or other municipalities in New York State. That policy framework, as I said earlier, is really important to guide the key stakeholders, especially engineers, architects, and contractors. And we'd be very happy to share our experience. But maybe you're going to go into the notion of consortia, but I'd love to talk more about it. Chris, do you want to say something first?
Yeah.
And then maybe I can
Absolutely
kind of read off your idea.
Yeah, I want to just sort of put that idea more writ large forward. I mean, that kind of consortium can consist of many different things. It can be just a learning consortium, as different, towns and counties and cities are figuring this out. Why not do that together rather than in isolation? But then New York State, something we're really proud of, we have a number of innovations that have been driven from the grassroots around the aggregation of demand that have happened in the sustainability space. Solarize initiatives. I know Tompkins County and the whole up and down the Hudson Valley were real leaders in kind of putting that model on the map in the area. Community solar, community choice aggregation. While they're all different, they all sort of function with the same idea of bringing together collective sort of will and demand to have a transformative effect. So it'd be interesting to see if we could potentially recreate something or create something along those lines around concrete. One other thing I wanted to just say too is around the DOT question. That would be a really interesting one to talk to in the forum, and to sort of plan for some activism around that, because you could see a bunch of local governments taking the lead and doing the work of normalizing these that can, the DOT's specifications aren't tablets handed down from heaven, although they feel that way. They can change over time as well. And it might require local action to make that happen. So that would be an interesting subject to discuss on our forum. But let me just present an idea as we, in this last 10 minutes, and again, use this as sort of a call to action, or an invitation to action. And just sharing my screen again. Let me know if you can, thumbs up if you can see it. Great, okay. So this is an idea that I am casually calling kick carbon to the curb. And it's an idea of, can we look at sidewalks as a starting point where, as we've heard from this whole process, it's an evolutionary learning process to get to achieve our wildest goals in terms of decarbonizing concrete. And it has to really start somewhere. And I sort of put forth that sidewalk and curb projects are great things for local governments to take on. And why is that? Again, I think I consider it sort of a gateway to low embodied carbon concrete for a number of different reasons. One is it's a universal form of infrastructure that all local, counties, towns and cities know about and they handle. So this is not some exotic, complex type of project. It's complex in ways that Morgan had mentioned, but from a construction project standpoint, it's relatively low on the ladder of complexity. Simplicity in that regard, but it's also, they're frequent. They happen a lot. They happen every 5 to 7 years. It's almost like a flow of projects that you can sort of bank on. Any geography. There's going to be sidewalk projects that are happening. They also allow, they're sort of bite size, again, to rob the cookie metaphor, but it allows you to dabble on something that could be relatively small. It doesn't even need to be as large. Even a portion of the project that Mayor Armacost just talked about, you could do different things with different stretches of sidewalks. And it's low risk. You know, if you worry, every engineer worries about, I don't want this to fall on someone's head. You know, that's understandable. And that's what we appreciate their expertise for. Concrete, you know, for sidewalks, there can be errors and things can not go optimally. And not that there's no risks to public safety, but it's quite low risk in that regard compared to other types of projects. And again, it allows you to sort of start simple. It was something that we can do frequently and then learn really quickly. So rather than starting with the wedding cake, you can sort of work your way up to that, and sidewalks are a good place to start. And then the other really, really key thing here that Matt, Professor Adams has really driven home for me, and it came out in his presentation, is that a lot of what you learn through doing a sidewalk project, those ingredients and processes that you familiarize yourself with and you raise the overall level of awareness around, you can do that with a sidewalk, and that can translate to more complicated projects, your wedding cake type of projects down the line. And that's really where we are right now, is to try to move the needle in terms of learning and comfort. And we're here actually able to follow the lead of a real champion, a real pioneer in this area. The city of Portland, Oregon has adopted its own low carbon concrete program for the city for procurement. But what they did recently, just last month, they published the results of a pilot they did where they also thought it was wise to start with sidewalks, to really start to do some experiments with that. And you can find this on the LECC website, actually, under Take Action. But they, for the same reason, they started with sidewalks. It just offers an opportunity for learning, and you can do them and you can test, and it creates a good sample. But what I'm interested in is what Mayor Armacost really sort of inspired the idea was they're very conducive to collective action because everybody does them, right? And they happen frequently. And it can become a point of focus for learning and action in ways that I don't want to get in the way of anybody taking on more ambitious projects as soon as possible. But in terms of a way of going up the on-ramp, developing comfort level and expertise, sidewalks can be something that we all kind of do together or sort of think through or share information about. And that was really one of the reasons what inspired this site that we launched. Here you'll be able to go. There's some great resources that you can read, some summaries of kinds of actions that you can take in addition to the Hastings Resolution is actually linked there, some information on some state policies that we're pursuing. But anyone, anywhere could actually benefit from that. And they can also join our forum. And I think what could happen in addition to the resources that we can continuously share about new sidewalk projects and concrete projects, one of the things that me and Professor Adams and some others are working on are taking his presentation and developing it into an interactive resource where folks can come, click on, learn about different solutions, find out if they're compatible with each other, and share that with their contractors and with their local concrete providers. But the forum in particular would allow folks that say, oh, you know what, we have a sidewalk project. I want to ask questions. Our forum will not only have Matt Adams on the phone, it'll have many other experts in academia, but practitioners in the concrete world. And then you can share your ideas and your progress and even what you did, what your mix was, and that can benefit other folks. And by doing that, we can also help connect folks with other stakeholders that are in the exact same area. So there is the possibility for that kind of geographically collaborative effort. And then, of course, on the forum, we'll be discussing a range of other different actions that could be taken at the local level, including something that we just touched on, which is very exciting, is the building codes innovation. There's some really interesting stuff that's happening in California, as well as in Hastings and other places. So please do go ahead and sign up. Now, as you come in, we'll respond to you by email and then let you in. So there's no hurry. Within the next 24 hours, we can admit you to the forum and then just ask away. And we'll let it evolve from there. We'll see what kind of questions people have and what kind of collective knowledge we can share. But I bet you through this type of community, we'll be able to accelerate a lot of progress on the local level. So with that, I think we're just out of time, right in time. But I want to thank everybody. And again, I want to thank Mayor Hastings and her team for their leadership. I want to thank Professor Matthew Adams, not only for his presentation, but his continuous wisdom and expertise that he is infusing into OpenAir's work, which you all can benefit from as well. And I want to thank everybody for attending out there, for tuning in. And really, more importantly, I look forward to collaborating and working with all of you. So thank you so much.